It's Luke here of Simbox, and I'm delighted to welcome back onto the channel our resident heavyweight boxing guru, Nick Campbell. Nick, how we doing?
Yeah, good luck, man. Good to be here. Thank you for having me as always. And it's a pleasure, man. It's good to be talking to you. I think it was a wee while since the last time we spoke, so a lot has happened between then and now. So good to be back chatting.
That's it. There's a lot of heavyweight boxing news. It's a thriving division, so that's certainly something I want to get into. And then a little word on Josh Taylor as well to close out. But first and foremost, we can only react to a stunning Fabio Wardley knockout of Justice Honey. He was a mile behind on the cards, and he produces the money shot to knock out Justice Honey, and he retains it. Is it the interim WBA regular heavyweight world title? But most importantly, it keeps him in line in that busy heavyweight division. How impressed was you, Nick, with Fabio Wardley in the way he was able to pull that out of the fire?
Listen, I mean, I was impressed with the stoppage. I actually watched some analysis on it from Malik Scott, and he spoke about how Fabio Wardley set up with the jab to the body. And when you watched his breakdown of it, the one punch that Fabio never neglected the whole fight, no matter how much pressure he was under, was that jab to the body. And it paid off in the end because he managed to, if you watch the sequence again, he jabbed Hooney to the body, then he feinted to go to the body, came over with that right hand, and it was the money shot that caught him. So he put a lot of deposits in the bank to finally get that one shot off that really made, like was the decider. So fair play to him for staying in the fight. Showed a lot of grit, a lot of determination. And but listen, the one I was very impressed with Justice Hooney. It just goes to show you, heavyweight boxing not only takes one moment you switch off and your lights are out, but I was very impressed with him. And I think if anything, obviously Fabio's stocks rose massively, but I think Hooney's definitely got a big future in the division as well. And listen, like I say, it only takes one punch to change a fight. So he's definitely got a massive future ahead of him. And Fabio moves on now. Justice has got to do a little bit of rebuilding, but what a fantastic fight! Great advert for the division. And do you know what? Fair play to Fabio Wardley. What did he have? 10 white collar fights, then thought he'd have a go and see where he could get. And now he's not far off a world title.
Yeah,
I think maybe.
it's almost like a Hollywood movie script, isn't it?
Listen, it's unbelievable. You can't help but admire the guy and his work ethic, and he's probably had a lot of people doubt him on the way. And I know, not this quite the same thing, but I came from a different sport. I had maybe more amateur experience, but limited fights, and I heard a lot of things that he's probably heard similar on the way up. I never achieved what Fabio's managed to achieve in the sport, but listen, I can understand some of the doubters and some of the things that he would have had said to him. So fair play to him. He's doubled down, dug his heels in, and he's reaping the rewards now.
Absolutely. You mentioned there about, the grit and the determination, but how impressed were you with Fabio Wardley's belief, that shot would come, that he's in with a guy with all this amateur experience. As you say, he's limited in terms of his amateur background. But like, it wasn't a lucky punch by any means, was it? Like you say, he jabbed to the body, he slipped, and the right hand come over the top. So the belief he must have in, the regime with Ben Davison, the knowledge that his moment will come no matter how late it is in the fight and how far behind it is. I was really impressed by that, and I'm assuming you was yourself.
Listen, I think when you're a big puncher like Fabio, who's maybe a bit more limited than the likes of Justice Sunny with a massive amateur experience, it all comes down to buying into what your team's telling you. He's obviously bought in massively to Ben's game plan. He stuck to it no matter what was being thrown at him, had the belief that he would get that shot. And like I say, he banked all the body shots to get that one right hand over the top on the money. So, you know what? Like in anything that you've got to, if you want to be successful in anything in life, you've got to be kind of not so risk averse. And it was obviously a big risk fighting somebody like Justice Hooney, who's obviously going to be a superior boxer to Fabio, but he knew he had the puncher's chance. They went in with the game plan and they employed it perfectly. He might have been behind on every card, but like we say, it's heavyweight boxing and it only takes one punch to stop the fight, and that's exactly what he went done. So no, listen, nothing but admiration for the performance. Fair play to him. I'm definitely a Fabio Wardley fan.
Absolutely. You mentioned there with Justice Sonny that his stock will have risen even in defeat. A big pal of yours, Joe Parker from New Zealand, Justice Honey from Australia. Is the name Honey ever cropped up on Joe Parker's radar, or is that somebody that's too close to the start of his career? Is that a fight that's ever been discussed from your knowledge?
Nah, listen, I think Joe's quite, a few levels above Hooney at the moment.
Yeah, I get obviously Joe Parker's
I
further down the
I
line, but
get
for that part of the world, it could be a big fight, couldn't it? If Justice
listen,
Honey moves on.
who knows, but listen, timing's everything in fights. Do you know what I mean? So everything in boxing. So I just don't think their time scales align.
Yeah,
But nah, Joe, I've asked Joe about it before. They obviously share a bit. I think he's Tongan. Is he? I don't. Listen, I get confused, but I think he's from Tongan, Samoan. This I don't. I'm not 100% sure, but he's got a lot of respect for him. Um, and I thinks he's got a big future ahead of him, but it's not somebody who's particularly in Joe's radar at the moment. And probably vice versa. I don't think Justice Hooney's looking at Joe and thinking he wants to try and, fight him in the next 2 or 3 fights because it's a wee bit unrealistic timing wise. But nah, sure there's a lot of mutual respect. They're both islanders, both big, strong communities on the islands from what I've seen, and they probably back each other and support one another, like you see with Joe and Opataya as well. So they're all brothers in that fraternity.
absolutely. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what's next for Hune and for Fabio Wardley. Just touching on Joseph Parker there, I'm right in saying that he welcomed a new baby into the world recently. So massive congratulations on that for Joseph Parker. Can you shed any light on where we're up to with Parker? He obviously beat Bacoli. He was hoping to have that fight with Daniel Dubois for the IBF world title. We know that's not happening now. Frank's categorically stated that he's not going to be on that July 19th card at Wembley either, and that'll be out in September. So, from your knowledge, Nick, where are we up to with Joe Parker?
Yeah, listen, I'm not too sure. Just as Joe's not too sure. I think there's a lot of frustration. Joe had such good momentum coming off the back of two career best performances in Zhang and Wilder. Really changed his career around, to be honest with you. In since he went from that Joe Joyce defeat, he's kind of, completely changed everything he does. Working with Andy Lee, brought George Lockhart in. The two, that he's got the perfect team there. He's got everything going for him. He's invested a lot of time and a hell of a lot of money, a lot of sacrifice. So very frustrating for him that he's not got anything over the line yet. There's been whispers of this fight, that fight, maybe this fight. You could fight this. I'm not too sure. He's done his best in calling people out. Do you know what I mean? He's probably had the most creative call outs in boxing history. But yeah, nothing's obviously came of that, and obviously all the titles are tied up between Dubois and Usyk. So I think I had seen the Chisora
Yeah,
fight, and on paper it doesn't really make much sense because he's been there, done it. I think he beats Derek pretty very convincingly and well within inside the distance if they were to fight now. But from a commercial point of view, it's a good fight to make. It'll sell tickets. Joe will make a bit of money. And I think as well, what is Chisora, the IBF mandatory?
yeah,
So he
yeah,
probably moves himself up into an IBF mandatory position then if he beats Derek. So it probably is a fight that kind of makes sense if you look at it from that point of view. And whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. It depends. I suppose it depends on money for Chisora. He's not going to take a big his 50th fight for unless it's a big payday. I knew there was talk of the Dylan White fight, but I've never seen like Moses Atuma and Dylan White have been linked. He's about in the wilderness at the moment, but it's positive that he's been told he's going to be on that September card. If I was putting any money on it, my money would have been on the White fight because that's another fight that makes sense. A rematch. A lot of questions from the last fight. Do you know what I mean? If Joe had managed to avoid the headbutt and not get knocked down, and then if he had managed to knock Dylan early in the last round, he probably wins the fight. So they've both obviously been on completely different paths in the last 2 years, 3 years anyway. So it makes for an interesting rematch. But I genuinely don't know. I don't know. My money would have been on the White fight, but
yeah.
who knows?
I think the worry is with Joe Parker, and I draw parallels with Jack Catterall. Where Jack Catterall had the defeat to Josh Taylor. It was very contentious, and people will argue for the length of time about that result. But then he kind of tread water for a little while. And he had these victories over Jorge Linares, He beat Josh Taylor in the rematch, and he still didn't get that world title shot. And then he kind of took one too many fights, and then he got beat by Arnold Barboza. And I suppose, for Joe Parker, if he beat Wilder, he beat Zhang, he beat Bacola. If he goes in there one more time, say with a Ajit Kabayel, who's a very capable fighter himself, it's a losable fight if we're being honest. And is the worry for Joe Parker that he takes one too many fights and then he never actually gets the pot of gold at the end in terms of a world title shot?
Yeah, listen, like every sport in it. Like there's always a risk in, but like I said, it's you've got to take risk if you want to get anywhere in life, whether that's business, sport, whatever it may be. So listen, there's always going to be an element of risk involved. But I suppose for Joe, he's worked so hard for so long. He's the WBO mandatory. Probably a fight like Chisora or White makes the most sense because it's the fight that realistically he's going to win. Not writing the other two guys off, but you look at it in form
Big
and
favourite.
you're going to be a massive favourite. It's commercially viable, make him a lot of money, and it allows everything else to play out. In the meantime, the belts might get fragmented. Who knows what's going to happen? And then he can fight for a world title. And if it's a 50-50 fight against somebody else for a world title, listen, Joe would fight anybody anyway. So it's not a question of it being a 50-50 fight. Whatever the fight odds are, Joe will take the fight. So I just think for me, I hope that he positions himself where he can get that world title shot and try and become a two-time world champion.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's very deserving of that. I think, just on that about Joe Parker, he'd take any fight, he'd fight any man. I think, for my money, if he was to fight anybody in the heavyweight division not named Alexander Usyk, I actually think Joe Parker starts as favourite at this point. He's on that such a run that I'd put him in as favourite against anyone other than Usyk.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think I've heard a lot of people talking about Atuma. I think it's far too early for it. Listen, he's undoubtedly, one of the most talented guys in world boxing, never mind the heavyweight division. He's got everything, but he's never really been put under pressure yet. We don't know how he's going to react when he's put under pressure. His kind of standout win was over Dempsey McKean. Listen, Dempsey McKean's a good fighter, but he's European level at best for me. I like Dempsey. I've had conversation with him, chatted to him. He's a cracking guy, but let's be realistic. It was a very devastating, great performance. I know Hergovich couldn't do what Moses done, but he still never had any resistance against him. I still think Moses is one or two, maybe even three fights away from being at that level. It's just because of the nature of his wins and how devastating he's been and how good he's looked doing it that people are mentioning this. But I think Frank Warren's going to manage him correctly. And one thing about Frank is he never ever mismatches. Not mismatches, but the timing's always right for whenever his prospects take their fights. So maybe two or three fights time that could become something that's more realistic. But right now, I think that's pretty unrealistic. And I think for Joe, like I say, Joe would fight anybody. So I've got no questions about Joe being scared of fighting Moses Atuma. But for him, it's a lose-lose for me because if he beats him, they say, oh, well, he wasn't ready for that step up. And if he gets beat, you shouldn't be getting beat off a 20-year-old. Can he win? So I think Joe needs to just, him and his management, they know what they're doing. Andy Lee as well is an incredibly gifted, knowledgeable boxing person who will guide him in the right way, position him in the right place. And like I said, hopefully get him that second world title.
Absolutely. So it segues perfectly into the next point I wanted to chat about, which is Moses Atama. We've spoke a lot about him there. If the Dillian White fight is next, is heavily rumoured. You spoke there that Dillian White could have potentially fought Joe Parker. He could have fought a trilogy with Derek Sora. There was rumours of an anti-Joshua rematch. Truth be told, that these fights you'd imagine would be a lot more financially rewarding for Dillian White at this point of his career, as opposed to a young, dangerous, unbeaten Moses Atama. What do you think of that fight, Nick? And what do you think of Dillian White's attitude in taking that fight?
Funny. Um, Listen, Dylan White's a big, proud man, you know what I mean? So he's going to back himself. Like I say, he's a fighter. He would probably fight anybody, he don't care. I think he's got that kind of attitude. But looking at it, I don't think it goes past 5 or 6 rounds with Moses Atama at the moment at this stage in his career. Too fast, too elusive, big puncher. The only question would be if Dylan manages to get through it, have anything any punch of notable success and he manages to put him under pressure, how's Moses going to react? Because he's never been really under pressure at any point in the ring, amateur or pro. So that would be the only interesting question that could maybe get answered from it. But it's a fight that I would see Moses Atuma winning quite comfortably. And it's a fight that makes a lot of sense for Atuma. It's against a Dylan White who's been out the ring really. I know he's had a couple of fights, but he's not really had anything meaningful in a long time. He's been out the ring before that for a long period of time with the drugs issue. He's still a big name. People still remember him fighting Joshua, still fighting Fury in front of 80,000 people at Wembley. He's a massive name in the heavyweight division. So it's a fight that makes a lot of sense for Atuma. But yeah, I think Moses Atuma would win it pretty convincingly. And aye, sky's the limit for the kids.
Absolutely. We look forward to a potential announcement for that fight. Nick, I was going to bring up Usyk and Dubois and Akoli and Lorena that's been announced today as well, but I think hopefully we'll get you on in a couple of weeks closer to that fight to discuss Wembley in July 19th. So we'll bypass that for now. Let's talk about Josh Taylor. We're a couple of weeks removed from that defeat up in Glasgow. He lost to Echo Asuman. What was your thoughts, Nick, on your fellow Scotsman making that return up at welterweight, the homecoming, everything was made for him. Echo Asuman was no easy touch with, everyone in the game, maybe not your casual fan, but everyone in the game knew how tough of a fight that could be and how much of a potential banana skin, and so it proved. What was your immediate reaction to Josh Taylor's defeat there?
Yeah, I think weight classes are a hard thing to navigate for these boys that need to make the weight. And I think that, Josh maybe stayed too long at light welter before moving up to welterweight. And I think that's maybe, he's paid the price for that in terms of his performance levels. I think on his day, Josh is arguably one of the best pound for pound fighters that Britain's ever produced. He was the first British undisputed champion, and he never got any real recognition for that, which, I don't want to get better here, but he's Scottish. We never get,
This
if he
this
was
was the
English,
point. Yeah, this is a point I was going to bring up, Nick, and I was intrigued to, as a Scottish person yourself, to get that kind of what's the name Josh Taylor mean in Scotland amongst Scottish people? Does he have that kind of recognition? Is he somebody that's like a national hero? Why is it not a bigger thing, as you say, if he was English, if he was promoted by Eddie Hearn, he'd be on cereal boxes, wouldn't he? So why has it not really happened for him in his side?
yeah, like I say, I think it's all politics and management, promoters, Scotland, England. Listen, I'm not bad at all, but you know what I'm saying. The fight wasn't even on British TV when he fought for the undisputed world title, the first ever British undisputed champion at
How
any weight.
crazy is that looking back? It's nuts, isn't it?
Mental. And like, what was he, 19, 20 fights in when he done that?
Yeah, and he beat a who's who of the division. It wasn't like he'd stumbled into the fight. He was beating everybody and beating them well.
And I think the record combined of the people he'd fought was something crazy, like 190 in one
Yeah.
past the five fights. So listen, Josh Taylor is never unfortunately going to get the recognition that he deserves. But for me, probably one of up there with the best ever Scottish fighter, and we're talking about Ken Buchanan. He's up there with him, and arguably one of the best ever
Yep.
British fighters in that run. But I just think weight's killed him. You've seen that in the first Catterall fight. He really struggled to make the weight. He was kind of drained going into the fight. And I maybe just it's a good example for any young fighter about state. I think as well. Listen, Josh, a bit of a party animal, and maybe never quite managed himself in between fights the way he should have, and that's taking its toll. But I don't like to speak badly of him because he's a guy that I've got a lot of respect for. I just think maybe making the weight preparation in between fights hasn't been quite on the money for him, and he's unfortunately paid the price. But let's take nothing away from him because he's the first ever British undisputed world champion. Can't ever take that away. It's always going to be there. And if he hangs the gloves up now, he achieved everything in the sport really. Olympian, Commonwealth gold medalist, undisputed world champion. Can't really take anything away from the guy.
Do you think he will hang up the gloves? He's got to take a real risky fight now, isn't it? If he was to come back and stay at 147, that there's going to be no gimme now. That he might have to go in there as the away fighter. He still draws a good crowd in Scotland, so but he's going to be a real test. He's not going to get a gimme now on the back of a loss, is it? So do you think he would retire?
Uh, well, listen, it's very. How can I possibly tell what he's going to do? And as well, there's finances that come in it as well. He could be offered an incredible amount of money to take a certain fight against somebody. So I don't know, but like I would like to see him retire. Um, uh, aye, I'd probably being honest, I'd probably like to see him retire because he's a guy I respect a great deal, and I don't want to see his legacy ruined in any way because he doesn't get the recognition that he deserves
Yeah,
as,
absolutely.
as it is. So, aye, I'd like to see him walk away, sail off into the sun, and hopefully one day people will look back and go, you know what, maybe we never gave Josh Taylor the respect and the celebration that he really deserved for what he managed to achieve in his career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's too good to end up with an end of a career. With all due respect, with the likes of a Roy Jones Jr. We see how Roy Jones is remembered now, but people don't really want to look at that back end of his career when he was taking losses to people that wouldn't lace his boots back in the day. And Josh Taylor's accomplished too much, and in his heyday was far too good to get into that kind of point of a career. I think it's fair to say.
No, listen, I think on his day, Josh beats uh nobody's beaten Josh easily on his day. And light welter or welter. Time's undefeated, unfortunately. So that's what it is. But listen, what an incredible fighter, what an incredible career. And whatever he decides to do next, I wish him the best.
Absolutely, Nick. There's a million and one things we could talk about tonight, but I always try and keep it based around heavyweight boxing. As I say, we'll get you back on if that's all right in a couple of weeks, and we'll look at Usyk and Dubois in a bit more depth, and the return of Deontay Wilder as well. That's coming up at the end of the month, so we'll get you on around that time, and we'll have a chat about the big fight at Wembley.
Yeah, no, listen, I'd love to. There's a lot to look forward to in this second half of the year as a boxing fan. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get on and chat about it. Usyk Dubois kicks it all off for me. And then it'll be very interesting to see where the division goes from there, whether the belts fragment up, what happens, who gets stripped of what title. There's a lot of heavyweights at the top end. We've spoke about Caballel, Joseph Parker, the main two. Matt McCauley's going to maybe be making a comeback fight somewhere. There's even talk of Tyson and Joshua being made. So it's going to be a very, very interesting end to the year. And that's just the heavyweight division. We've got all these other amazing fights at other weights and incredible fighters, very talented, gifted fighters. So we're lucky as boxing fans, especially with your man Tucky coming in as well. We just seen Crawford and Canelo being announced. We're a totally different promoter. He's froze out Eddie and Frank for that one, and all the other ones top rank. It's going to be Dana White promoting that, so that's going to be very interesting. There's loads happening, so I stay tuned, and you can listen to me and look talk complete nonsense for a couple of half
Could
a
say
second.
couldn't say it any better myself, Nick. What perfect way to close out. But as always, big man, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I really do appreciate your time with Simbox, and we'll catch up again real soon.
Thank you for having me. Speak to you soon.